The 10th year of being a substitute bride, my sister suddenly came back. The whole family silently stared at her. She yawned and said casually, "I've traveled to 13 countries, exhausting. Where's Leo? He's in elementary school now, right? Why hasn't he come to see his biological mother yet? Leo is my sister's son. Back then, she gave birth to him but faked her death on their wedding day, leaving behind her son and fiancé. Ashford is an old money family from the elite circles of Beijing. Our parents didn't dare offend them, so they decided to pack up their freshly graduated daughter, me, and send me to the wedding. Over the past 10 years, I have become a qualified wife and a responsible mother." Seeing my sister's self-righteous expression, my parents' gaze fell on me. I smiled faintly. Leo and his father went to Harbor City for a trip. Hearing this, my sister Vivian frowned and said discontentedly, "Didn't I tell you in advance that I was coming home? Didn't you inform Ethan about my return?" I calmly took a sip of tea from my cup. After all these years of growth, I was no longer the unnoticed shadow living under my sister's spotlight. My silence infuriated Vivian completely. She abruptly stood up, her sharp voice ringing out. "Nina. What do you mean by this? Don't forget, it's me who's engaged to Ethan. Now that I'm back, did you really think you could keep sitting in the position of Ethan's wife?" I glanced at her and smiled. "Sister, I don't understand what you're saying. My husband and I have a very good relationship. Over the years, I have accompanied Ethan to various charity dinners and social events. Our reputation as a loving couple has spread throughout the circle. Ethan has even gained the admiration of many business partners through his image as a devoted husband. There may be no romantic feelings between Ethan and me, but we share a bond stronger than love, that is, mutual benefit. This is why I was so confident." Vivian wore an expression of disbelief as she pointed at me and shouted, "Nina. Have you no shame? That's your sister's husband." I set down my teacup and smiled calmly but firmly. "No, we're legally married." With determined eyes, I stood up, unwilling to continue this farce any longer. My parents stood nearby, looking utterly at a loss. Vivian rushed over and grabbed her mother's sleeve. "Mom, my sister has gone crazy. Ethan and I were the couple who got together in college. Without me, without Ashford, how could our family's company have grown this big?" Our parents had always favored Vivian since we were young. But at this moment, my mother stole a glance at my expression and said weakly, "But, you ran away from the wedding. You even faked your death. All these years, we never heard a single word from you. The bride was missing at the wedding back then. If it weren't for your sister, Ashford would have been ridiculed and wouldn't have let it slide, our family's company would have been ruined." Vivian's face froze for a moment, and she stammered an explanation. I just wasn't ready to get married at the time, but I'm back now, aren't I? Besides, you all know how arrogant the Ashfords are. They've always looked down on our family, and with me getting pregnant before marriage, if I'd married into their family then, wouldn't I just have been walking into a life of humiliation?" My gaze turned cold as I asked, "Why did you come back?" Vivian replied with utter confidence, "Now that Ashford has accepted you, surely he can accept me too. It's perfect timing. I'm married to Ethan now, so my in-laws probably won't treat me poorly, and Leo can finally meet his birth mother. This is good for everyone." With that, she stepped forward and gripped my hand tightly, looking at me with earnest sincerity. "Sister, you're free now. You can go find your own happiness." I stared into her eyes without expression. Those almond-shaped eyes held the naivety cultivated since childhood through excessive indulgence and favoritism. A cruelty disguised as innocence. She was so convinced that I, the neglected younger sister, existed solely to make sacrifices for her. I sneered as I pulled my hand from hers. "I'm perfectly content with my life as it is, sister. It's time you faced reality." After speaking, I turned and walked away from that loveless home. I didn't know what Vivian was feeling behind me, but it surely couldn't be good. Yet I knew in my heart that someone as willful as Vivian wouldn't give up so easily. Exhausted, I dragged myself back to Ashford. These past few days, I've been buried in work on the project, pulling late nights almost every day. I walked in and rubbed my temples. An hour ago, I received a message from my parents saying my sister was back. At that moment, my body froze in place. I had thought Vivian would return, but when the day finally came, I still couldn't help but freeze. I hung my bag on the coat rack and looked down to see a pair of men's shoes on the floor. I froze for a second before quickly forcing a polite smile. "You're back?" A gentle voice sounded. I turned back to look. Ethan was dressed in pure black pajamas, and even the simple, ordinary sleepwear couldn't hide his broad shoulders and narrow waist, his tall frame and striking features, with gentle eyes behind golden-framed glasses. He frowned slightly, looking at me with concern. "Why are you so tired? Haven't you rested properly these past few days?" I smiled. "There's just too much work at the company." "Did you have fun these past few days? How was Leo?" Ethan stepped forward and gently pulled me into his embrace. His chin rested on my shoulder, his warm breath brushing against my neck as his slender fingers stroked my back lightly. Softly, he said, "Leo is very happy and has fallen asleep from exhaustion. The only regret is that you're not here. Next time, let's go out together as a family of 3. I miss you," he said, his tone laced with ambiguous intimacy. I could feel the warmth of his chest, but my heart was unbearably cold. I felt something soft press against the back of my neck. My body froze, my mind completely occupied by what Vivian had told me earlier that day. I didn't respond to him the way I used to. With slight resistance, I pushed my hand against him to create some distance between us. My words trailed off mid-sentence, as I distinctly felt Ethan's body stiffen momentarily. I keenly sensed his unhappiness. After a long pause, Ethan smiled and took over the conversation. "You've been too exhausted lately. Take a shower and get some proper rest." He'd found a reason for me. With that, he gently planted a kiss on my forehead. I nodded and turned to go upstairs. Behind me, the man hidden in the shadows had an indistinct, somber expression. The air around him seemed almost frozen, his gaze locked intensely on that preoccupied figure's retreating back. The next day, as usual, I went to work. Just after leaving the neighborhood, I saw a familiar figure. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, and my brow furrowed deeply. Vivian also saw my car. She suddenly rushed in front of my vehicle, forcing me to stop. The cars behind honked frantically. It was rush hour, exactly when people were heading to work. The security guard was eager to drag Vivian away. Vivian wouldn't relent, even as she was being dragged away, she kept shouting frantically. "Nina! Don't you dare play dead with me. You're shamelessly clinging to your brother-in-law, do you even have any dignity left?" Her sharp, piercing voice drew the attention of everyone around. I pulled the car aside to make sure I wasn't blocking anyone's way, then got out. I looked at her with a cold expression, while Vivian flashed a triumphant smile, brushing her disheveled hair with her fingers. She laughed and said, "What? Ashamed? Or afraid Ethan will dump you if he finds out I'm back?" My voice was ice cold. "Vivian, you're seriously disrupting my life right now. This is my final warning, don't come looking for me again." Vivian didn't take my warning seriously at all. She wore a determined, confident smile. "Stop pretending, you're just scared. After all, you've lived in my shadow since childhood. It's only natural to envy and want to replace me." Her voice paused for a moment before she took a few steps forward, whispering in my ear. "Pity, the cuckoo that seizes the nest will always be driven away. I'll wait right here. When I see Ethan, I'll explain everything to him, he'll definitely forgive me. And Leo, he's my biological child, bonded to me by unbreakable blood ties. You'll never replace me." I didn't respond, turning to get into the car. This time, Vivian didn't stop me. In the rearview mirror, I saw her smiling as she looked at my car. A chill ran down my spine. Vivian had been spoiled since childhood and never followed any rules. If anyone displeased her, she would throw tantrums like a giant baby. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to pull my thoughts away from her. Over the years, I had painstakingly built my marriage and career. If we get divorced, not just me, but also Ethan, our interests will take a hit. Ethan still has a way out. But behind me, there's only myself. Sitting in the office, my thoughts drift far away. Back in elementary school, every winter and summer vacation, Vivian would go out wild like a tomboy, and by the time school started, she hadn't even touched her homework. Afraid of the teacher's scolding, she would try to pass off my completed homework as her own. Mom and Dad found a reasonable excuse: my academic performance was good, so even if I didn't do my homework, the teachers wouldn't blame me. But Vivian was different. If she didn't do her homework, the teacher would definitely scold her in front of the whole class. For the sake of Vivian's dignity, my efforts could be taken away without a second thought. From then on, every holiday, I prudently wrote 2 sets of homework. In high school, Vivian started dating early. She pursued the school's heartthrob with fanfare, got into fights, and ingratiated herself with all the teachers. Although she wasn't good at studying, she had a cheerful personality and naturally made many friends. From childhood to adulthood, someone always had her back when she acted willfully. Yet I had to live cautiously, weighing every step carefully. After entering university, she met Ethan at a music festival during an off-campus event. They performed at a quiet bar, forming a temporary band together. Within 2 months, while I was running between various part-time jobs to cover my tuition, they were wildly embracing the madness of youth on stage. I always thought that after graduating from college, I would save up a sum of money and completely escape from my family of origin. Until that night, Vivian came home very late, her face heavily made up, wearing a crop top and ultra-short shorts. She had drunk too much. The moment she got home, she started feeling unwell, and my parents were so worried they took her to the hospital overnight. Later, the test results came out. Vivian was pregnant. During that time, the entire family was eerily silent, with Mom and Dad thrown into confusion by the sudden news. I was busy working part-time during the holidays to save up for tuition. Surprisingly, Vivian was the most carefree member of the family. She was completely unaware of the new life growing inside her. Because of the pregnancy, Mom and Dad insisted she stay home to rest, consuming nutritional supplements and fresh fruits every day. She spent all her time at home. My family has already discussed the marriage with Ashford. Once the child is born, a paternity test will be conducted, and after that, the wedding will take place. Everything was negotiated perfectly. Ashford had no choice but to accept this marriage. If this scandal were exposed, Ashford's reputation would be ruined, and it could even affect the company's stock. The night before the wedding, I took a high-speed train home, a journey of over 4 hours. But the next day, when the bridal car arrived to pick her up, Vivian had disappeared. The only ones left in the room were the baby Leo and a scowling Ashford. Ethan's face darkened, while Mom and Dad stood awkwardly, their eyes slowly shifting toward me. Mom seemed to grab onto a lifeline. "We have another daughter. She's never even dated before." Dad immediately chimed in, "Exactly. Nina. Hurry. With your sister gone, you'll have to step in now." I stood frozen in place, my mind still struggling to process what was happening. My parents had already grabbed hold of me, each pulling one of my arms, ready to drag me into the changing room to put on the wedding dress. I struggled desperately, my heart sinking to the depths. Anger and disbelief twisted together inside me. The first 20 years of my life had been lived in Vivian's shadow, and now the rest of my life was to be sacrificed for Vivian. Resentment filled my heart, and my nose stung. It was the first time I broke down, arguing loudly and shaking off the hands that held me back. Why should I? Why should I be responsible for her selfishness? It's always been like this since we were kids. Hearing this, Dad slapped me hard across the face. "That's your sister." I staggered a few steps, the pain on my face burning fiercely. Mom cried with tears streaming down her face. "Your sister did go too far this time," but you can't just watch our family fall apart. The guests are all waiting for the bride now. My face turned ashen, and I finally forced out a few words through gritted teeth: I won't get married. No matter how they pleaded or even tried to physically force me, I remained resolute and refused to yield. I pressed the fruit knife against my neck, my eyes red as I said, if anyone pushes me, I'll kill myself. After those words, everyone present froze. I didn't know if they were afraid I'd die or worried that causing a death would bring more trouble. Whatever the reason, I didn't care anymore. I had already graduated, and once I found a job, I could finally have my freedom. The standoff continued until Ethan finally suggested talking to me alone. Everyone was cleared out. In the dressing room, only Ethan and I remained. Half an hour later, the dressing room door opened. I put on my wedding dress and placed my hand on Ethan's with an expressionless face. I forced a smile uglier than a frown throughout the entire wedding ceremony. My thoughts snapped back to the present. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, I looked down at the floors below. This position was what I had worked tirelessly for 10 years to achieve. I felt a sudden chill when a pair of hands suddenly embraced me from behind. I was startled, but the sandalwood fragrance filling my nose made me relax. "What's on your mind?" "You didn't even notice me coming in," a magnetic voice murmured by my ear. I smiled, thinking about tomorrow's investment conference. Ethan held my shoulders and turned me around. "I believe in you, your abilities speak for themselves." A smile curved at the corners of my lips as I asked, "What brings you to the company? Isn't headquarters busy?" "Nothing much, I came to pick you up from work, and by the way, Leo wants to watch that new movie that just came out tomorrow." I nodded absent-mindedly. Ethan planted a kiss by my lips. I gave him a sweet smile in return. That day when I came home, I didn't see Vivian anywhere. She was eerily quiet. I thought perhaps Mom and Dad had chosen to keep her confined at home to protect the company's interests. I'd been too exhausted mentally and physically these past few days. That night, as soon as I hit the bed, I fell asleep. In the middle of the night, a forceful embrace pulled me against someone's chest. I let out a few discontented murmurs, too drowsy to open my heavy eyelids. The next day, inside the bustling investment event, countless dignitaries clinked glasses and mingled. Amidst the crowd, I entertained guests, stealing a moment of respite to retreat to the backstage lounge. Leo sat obediently on the sofa, waiting for me, his eyes lighting up as soon as he saw me. "Mommy, after this is over, are we really going to watch a movie?" I smiled affectionately and gently booped his nose. "Of course. When have Mommy and Daddy ever broken a promise to Leo?" My answer made Leo burst into laughter. Seeing Leo, I felt slightly reassured. Since the start of the investment conference, I'd been having a bad premonition. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door to the dressing room. Inside the banquet hall, my gaze landed on a familiar figure, and my body stiffened. Not far away, Vivian was pulling Ethan aside to speak to him, and Ethan had his back turned to me, so I couldn't see his expression. The next second, Vivian saw me. She pointed at me and shrieked, "I'm your lawful wife. She's the shameless one who stole you and our child." In an instant, all eyes in the room were fixed on me. The clamor in the banquet hall seemed to hit an abrupt pause. All conversations and clinking glasses came to a sudden halt. Countless gazes, like spotlights, were trained on me. I clearly saw familiar business partners' fleeting glances of shock and doubt, as well as the whispers among company subordinates. What's worse, the reporters at the investment conference had already pointed their cameras in this direction. Every tiny micro-expression on my face would be endlessly magnified and scrutinized. I felt blood rush to my head in an instant, only to freeze my entire body the next second. Vivian stood beside Ethan, wearing a pitiful expression as if she had suffered immense injustice. Her fingers tightly gripped Ethan's arm, her voice trembling with tears yet loud enough to be heard by everyone present. "Ethan, tell everyone. Tell them. We are the ones truly in love." Back then I just had a temporary lapse. I wasn't ready for marriage, but none of this gives Nina any right to steal my place. Whispers swirled around her like crashing waves. Who is this woman? Haven't Ethan and Nina always been a loving couple? From what she said, is Leo actually her and Ethan's son? Quick, get the shot. Tonight's trending topic is secured. This is major news. Ethan remained silent, while my grip on the wine glass tightened. Vivian turned to me, her gaze like a poisoned dagger. Nina. You clearly knew about my relationship with Ethan, knew Leo is my child. Why did you still take advantage of the situation? Are you that desperate for a man? To marry into wealth, you'd even snatch your own sister's husband. These words sent the room into an uproar. All eyes turned inquisitively toward me as they whispered about my relationship with Vivian. Countless doubtful gazes fell upon me. It took me a moment to find my voice before I uttered coldly. Vivian, this is not a place for your nonsense. You're damaging my reputation right now, I can sue you. Vivian said indifferently, is that so? After saying this, two people approached from the crowd. I clenched my fists, nails digging deep into my flesh, yet I felt no pain. My parents stepped forward, my mother pleading with me earnestly. Nina, just get a divorce. This marriage was a mistake from the very beginning. It will ruin your entire life. My father added, do you have no thought for your sister? Your sister has never suffered hardship since childhood, how can you bear to make her spend the rest of her life watching the man she loves live out his days with her own younger sister? You're going to make her depressed for life. A mocking curve tugged at the corner of my lips. Who was the one begging me to marry in their place back then? Has Vivian never suffered hardship? Does that mean I'm destined to suffer mine? My entire life has been wasted by them. At that moment, Ethan stepped forward and put his arm around my shoulder, his deep and magnetic voice resonating. My wife has always been Nina, and no one else. The words had barely left his mouth when Vivian's expression twisted instantly. Ethan. You. Have you forgotten our past? With coldness on my face, I spoke word by word. The past? What past? Vivian, let me say it again, this is neither the place for you to cause trouble nor where you can climb the social ladder. Vivian seemed to hear something utterly ridiculous. Climb the social ladder, she mocked with a sneer. Yes, isn't it you who discovered your brother-in-law's fame and wanted to climb the social ladder? With just 2 sentences, I turned the tables. The crowd immediately showed expressions of sudden realization. So it's the older sister who can't stand to see the younger one doing well, no wonder we'd never heard Nina had an elder sister before. From what I can see, the parents are just as muddle-headed, their favoritism is as vast as the Pacific Ocean. Making such a scene today, isn't this deliberately embarrassing Nina? Vivian couldn't defend herself no matter how much she tried, and our parents' expressions grew increasingly grim. Clenching her teeth, she pointed at me with resentment. Nina. Stop slandering me. After saying this, Vivian turned her affectionate gaze to Ethan. Ethan, do you really not have any lingering feelings for me? At this moment, Ethan's entire aura had dropped to an all-time low. His dangerous eyes locked onto Vivian's tear-filled gaze. Without saying a word, Ethan remained silent until, shortly after, several security guards hurriedly rushed to the scene. Among them, the security captain, drenched in sweat, said to Ethan. Sorry, Ethan. It was our oversight. This woman claimed she knew Nina, so we let her in. Vivian looked wary. What do you want? I'm Leo's biological mother. I'm blood related to the Ashfords. I snapped coldly, it's the investment fair today. Do you have an invitation? My sudden remark left Vivian frozen in place. Seeing this, I sneered and said. You don't even have an invitation and you're making a scene here. Security, escort her out. I spoke with righteous indignation. There were simply too many reporters present, no matter what, I had to protect Ashford's reputation. The interests involved in this are truly too many. I watched helplessly as the security guards dragged away the hysterical Vivian. I take a deep breath. Ethan gently holds my hand, as if to comfort me. I force out a weak smile. The influential figures present are all sharp-minded. Within a few words, this farce was brushed aside. Ethan leads me toward the lounge. Don't worry, the gossip columns won't spread rumors about tonight's incident. Tomorrow's trending topic will only highlight the deep affection between us as a couple, Ethan says with his usual calm demeanor. I meet his deep gaze, finding not a trace of uncontrolled emotion. So composed. Terrifyingly composed. Ethan is no longer that impulsive young man, now he has inherited Ashford's coldness and profit-first mentality. I let out a bitter laugh. Isn't this exactly why I chose to collaborate with him in the first place? Steadying my emotions, I walk to the lounge door, where Ethan presses a kiss to my forehead. Rest well for a while. Once the investment conference is over, we'll go home together. I smiled and pushed open the door, but my expression changed drastically. I panicked and said, Ethan. Leo is missing. Ethan's face instantly darkened as he hurried into the lounge. The sofa where Leo should have been sitting was empty. Only a crumpled elephant plush toy was left lying alone on the carpet. I rushed over to pick up the toy, my fingers turning cold. It was the stuffed animal Leo never let go of. Who just came in? Ethan's voice was laced with suppressed fury as he sharply turned towards the security guard at the door. The head guard turned pale, stammering as he spoke. And no one. We've been stationed outside the whole time, only saw you, Nina, go in. Leo was still here when I went in. My voice trembled, my heart gripped by an invisible hand. He was being so good, said he'd wait here until I finished my work. Leo was raised by me since childhood, and in my eyes, he has long been like my own biological son. Although Vivian is despicable, Leo is innocent. Now all I can do is hope that Vivian retains a shred of maternal love and doesn't do anything to Leo. Ethan immediately took out his phone, checked the surveillance. Seal all exits now, no one leaves the venue. His commands were clear and swift, the calm honed through years of business battles revealed itself fully at this moment. But I could see his tightly pursed lips and slightly trembling hands. Our group arrived at the surveillance room, where security personnel checked the footage only to find that the hallway cameras were broken, leaving only the cameras in the lounge functional. In the surveillance room, the images on the screen made my blood almost freeze. In the footage, Leo was sitting obediently on the sofa waiting for me when suddenly, the lounge door opened. He seemed to see something, and to my horror, he walked out. It's Vivian! I practically shouted, my nails digging deep into my palms. She must have taken Leo away while everyone was in the front hall. Ethan's face darkened terrifyingly as he tried to console me. Don't worry, Vivian wouldn't dare do anything. As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately dialed a number and said coldly, William, go to Harlow. I need to know where Vivian is right now. The entire investment fair descended into chaos due to this sudden turn of events. But Ethan quickly made arrangements. Some people continued to maintain order at the venue, while to the outside world, they only claimed that the child had a sudden illness and was taken to the hospital. Meanwhile, we took a team and drove to Harlow. In the car, I clenched my fists tightly, my heart pounding in my chest. Everything will be fine, Nina. Ethan held my hand, his palm just as cold yet trying to give me strength. Vivian wouldn't dare harm Leo. She probably just wants to use him as leverage against us. Leverage? I struggled to stay calm. What do you think she wants? Money? Or you? Ethan and I locked eyes in silence. Without saying a word, we reached an unspoken agreement. No matter what, the child's safety came first. Half an hour later, we arrived at Harlow. As we stepped inside, Vivian was holding Leo while watching TV in the living room. Spotting Ethan and me, Leo shouted excitedly, Mom! Dad! He still didn't realize the danger he was in. I took a deep breath, relieved to see with my own eyes that Leo was safe. At this moment, I looked at Vivian and said, Go on, what are your conditions? Vivian ignored me. She glanced at the large group of people behind us, then looked at Ethan and said with grievance, I just want everything to go back to how it was before. Ethan, don't you remember? We were so happy back then. She continued, Leo is my own child, how could I ever hurt him? Vivian wore a hypocritical expression. But I knew Vivian was too selfish by nature, she only ever thought of herself. Ethan's gaze was as cold as tempered ice. He took a step forward, the oppressive aura around him suffocating. Vivian, put the child down. Vivian, however, acted as if she didn't hear, hugging Leo even tighter. She nuzzled her chin against Leo's soft hair, her face revealing a tenderness bordering on sickness. Leo, look, Mommy and Daddy are both here to pick you up. But tell Mommy, would you like to live with your real mother? Leo was feeling uncomfortable from her tight grip. He frowned and squirmed slightly, then looked at me timidly, Mommy, I want to go home. The mommy he referred to had always been me. Vivian's smile froze, quickly replaced by intense jealousy and resentment. She suddenly stood up and forcefully pushed Leo to the ground. Leo fell to the ground, his head hitting the floor hard, and immediately cried out in pain. I looked at Leo with heartache, my icy glare shooting straight at Vivian. Vivian's face twisted in fury as she shouted, ungrateful wretch. I'm your real mother, the one who carried you for 10 months and gave birth to you. As she finished speaking, she raised her hand to slap Leo. Just then, the door to Harlow suddenly swung open. The first thing that caught my eye was Grace. I softly called out, Mom. Grace's face was cold, her entire aura radiating in overwhelming intensity. The moment Vivian saw Grace, it was as if she had spotted a lifesaver. She immediately forgot about Leo and hurried over to Grace. Grace, I'm Vivian. You remember me, right? I'm the one who got engaged to Ethan. I'm Ethan's wife. She spoke urgently. Watching her, I couldn't help but frown, suddenly sensing that something wasn't quite right. Vivian seems too extreme? Grace's voice interrupted my thoughts. Vivian? That name sounds somewhat familiar. You're my daughter-in-law's elder sister, aren't you? Grace smirked, while Vivian froze upon hearing this. No. Ethan and I were in a relationship back then. Before she could finish speaking, Grace abruptly interrupted her. Enough. Ethan and Nina have always been deeply in love. The Ashford family doesn't need another daughter-in-law. Grace's stance was crystal clear. Vivian collapsed weakly onto the floor. The majority of control over Ashford's company still lay firmly in Grace's hands. As long as Grace recognized me, Vivian would never have a chance to enter their family. But deep down I knew that Grace's unwavering choice of me wasn't due to any particular fondness, but simply because I could bring more benefits to Ashford. Just then, Leo came running and threw himself into my arms. Vivian instinctively reached out to grab Leo, but caught nothing but empty air. Before leaving, for some inexplicable reason I turned back to look at Vivian one last time. Her lips were pale, her complexion utterly drained. I frowned, feeling puzzled. Although Vivian was willful, she had never been so morbidly obsessed with marrying into the Ashford family before. Unless she had a secret that compelled her to marry into the Ashford family quickly. After that day, I didn't see Vivian for a long time. After asking around, I discovered that my parents had confined Vivian at home, but not because they had suddenly awakened their conscience. It was because Ethan had stepped in. He applied pressure to Harlow's company. All these years, my father's capabilities have been limited, and Harlow's small company has long been on the verge of collapse. If not for clinging to the Ashford family's big tree, the company would have gone under long ago. Now, all the partners who had cooperated out of respect for Ashford are pulling their investments. Only then did my parents begin to feel a real and tangible crisis. Helpless, they had no choice but to confine Vivian at home. News of Vivian completely ceased, and I had no desire to return to that cold and hypocritical Harlow either. But Vivian's existence remained a constant threat to me. I assigned a driver to pick up and drop off Leo daily to ensure his safety. I'm grateful that Leo is very sensible, that incident didn't leave too much of a shadow on him. He remains that healthy and cheerful child. Meanwhile, my assistant also brought me news that left me stunned. Linda had started buying baby supplies and traditional Chinese medicine to stabilize a pregnant woman's mood. In an instant, everything clicked, and all the puzzles in my mind were solved. No wonder I always felt there was something odd about Vivian. I quickly made a decision and sent someone to secretly investigate what Vivian had actually been doing during her 10 years abroad. This information wasn't hard to find. Within half a month, I obtained all the details about Vivian's time overseas. The materials revealed that Vivian had lived just as wildly and recklessly during those 10 years abroad. A month before Vivian returned to China, she became pregnant. The father was a homeless man with whom she had a one-night stand at a bar, and no further information was available. At first, Vivian didn't take this child seriously. She was used to having someone else clean up her messes. Perhaps she assumed this child, like Leo, would have no real impact on her life. But she couldn't even take care of herself. Her chronic sleep deprivation, alcoholism, and even promiscuous lifestyle made it impossible. On top of that, her funds were running low. The declining quality of life, combined with pregnancy hormones, left her in an increasingly deteriorating state. Reluctantly, she had no choice but to return home. That's when the following events unfolded. I suspect this experience made her realize just how important money is, and our parents certainly brought up my marriage to Ethan after she got home. She wanted to become Ethan's wife so their unborn child would have a stable home, and she could maintain her standard of living. But she never expected that this time, no one would indulge her anymore. No wonder she was so eager to marry into the Ashford family, even using Leo as a bargaining chip. Unfortunately, her plan failed. This can hardly be called a plan, just a woman's desperate clinging. I did the math, and Vivian should be due soon. During this period of keeping the door shut, Vivian's pregnancy must have become impossible to hide. The leaves of the plane tree outside the window, swept by the autumn wind, rustled against the glass. I locked the documents in the safe, then turned to look at the photo on the wall of Leo hugging his stuffed elephant toy. In the photo, the child grinned, revealing 2 little canine teeth. Sunlight filtered through his soft hair, casting delicate specks of light across his cheeks. I thought, I would never let Leo know these truths. He deserves a healthy and happy childhood. Nina. Ethan pushed the door open as I stood absent-mindedly in front of the safe. He placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "We're going to the old house tomorrow to celebrate Mom's birthday." I took the glass of lukewarm water he handed me, my fingertips brushing unintentionally against the jade toggle on his wrist. It was the safety knot I had personally woven when Leo was born. "All right," I smiled. Ethan paused his movements, his deep eyes inadvertently falling upon the safe. He tacitly asked nothing but instead reminded me to rest well. Early the next morning, just as Ethan and I had finished packing, the butler hurried in to announce, "Ethan, Nina, someone from Harlow's side has arrived," saying Nina's sister is about to give birth. Upon hearing this, I was stunned. Not because Vivian was about to give birth, but because they actually spread this news. By my judgment, they had intended to keep Vivian's pregnancy a secret. After all, this wasn't a glorious matter. Harlow was a person of status, and Vivian would undoubtedly live her life domestically in the future. Now, there's only one possibility: Vivian's condition must not be very good. "Do you want to go?" a deep, gentle voice spoke up. I turned my head, looking into Ethan's frank eyes, and slowly said, "I'd like to see." With that, we drove to the hospital. The smell of disinfectant in the hospital made my throat tighten. Outside the delivery room, my parents sat exhausted on the chairs, waiting. In just a few months, their hair had turned almost half gray. During this period, company matters and Vivian had exhausted their mental energy. Their gazes fell upon me, yet they dared not greet me. I ignored them and instead fixed my eyes on the delivery room before me. Vivian had a premature birth. Shortly after, the lights in the delivery room went out, and the doctor emerged wearily. "Vivian is hemorrhaging badly and won't make it." We did everything we could. Mom and Dad looked utterly devastated, their bodies sliding limply from the chairs onto the floor. Clutching at a final shred of hope, Mom asked urgently, "What about the baby?" The doctor hesitated before saying, "Due to irregular lifestyle habits during pregnancy, the fetus is currently in poor condition." Worried the parents couldn't bear the truth, the doctor spoke vaguely. Just then, a nurse emerged holding the baby. It was a premature baby weighing less than 3 pounds, with wrinkled skin resembling a kitten, covered in red spots all over its body, and limbs twisted in an utterly unnatural posture. When my parents saw the infant in the swaddling clothes, they nearly passed out on the spot. In the factory building, Vivian let out a heart-wrenching scream of pain. She was on the verge of collapse. The doctors and nurses in the ward wheeled out the mobile hospital bed, Vivian's face on it as pale as a sheet of paper. As she passed by, Vivian's eyes widened slightly, staring at me intently. Suddenly, she raised her hand with great effort, and everyone stopped. I took a few steps forward and leaned down. I knew she had something to say to me. Vivian gritted her teeth and whispered in my ear. "Ethan chose you because of interests. In this marriage, you won't find happiness." I curled my lips and replied in a voice only the two of us could hear, "It doesn't matter." I don't want to delve into how much love there was in this relationship, or how much self-interest. Nor do I believe that pure love should be completely free from any trace of self-interest. Love and self-interest are not mutually exclusive things after all. All I know is that I've adapted very well to my current life. That's enough. As I finished speaking, Vivian's eyes widened slightly, her gaze carrying far too many emotions. Resentment, confusion, bitterness, acceptance. Finally, the light completely faded from her eyes, her hand lost all strength and dropped limply onto the hospital bed. In that instant, our parents' anguished cries filled the entire hospital. Amid the clamor, a pair of hands with distinct knuckles and a slight chill grasped mine. "Let's go home," Ethan said. I softly murmured and tightly held his hand. As we stepped out of the hospital entrance, the autumn sunlight was rather glaring. I instinctively squinted my eyes. Ethan pulled me closer to his side, using his own shadow to block some of the light for me. Vivian's death was like a stone thrown into a lake. After stirring momentary ripples, it seemed to quickly return to calm. My parents raised the deformed child Vivian left behind. Though they suffered, it was something they willingly accepted. And I went on with my life. My career grew bigger and bigger. The time had finally come when I resigned from the Ashford branch to start my own business. Though Ethan disapproved of my decision, he ultimately said nothing. I understood his thoughts. Our marriage had begun with mutual benefits, and if I no longer needed Ashford's advantages, he would completely lose control over our relationship. I could sense his unease, yet I still didn't open up to him, instead throwing myself into the hectic early stages of building my company. Until one night, Ethan came up to me with dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't been sleeping well during this time. "Nina, never mind." After saying that, he asked again, unwilling to let it go, "In a marriage, we should be completely honest with each other and say whatever is on our minds, right?" As soon as he finished speaking, he took a deep breath, and I suddenly interrupted him. "If saying this clearly will affect our relationship, then never say it out loud." My calm voice echoed through the villa at night. Ethan tightened his grip on the water glass, then finally turned and left. I watched his receding figure, my gaze unfathomably deep. This relationship, as long as it remains unclear for a day, Ethan will remain the unsettled party in it. I will always stand on the higher ground in relationships. Ethan wants to ask which matters more to me, self-interest or love. And the unspoken answer in my heart is, what truly matters is oneself. To me, myself is more important. So whether interests and love matter or not depends solely on what I choose at the moment.